The morning Derek Chen first spotted them, he was fixing the sprinkler system in his backyard, the very edge of his lot, right where his property line met the HOA fence. His daughter Sophie was inside doing calculus homework, supposedly. His wife Maria was at work. Just Derek and the desert heat of Phoenix, temperature climbing toward 95 by 11 in the morning. That's when he heard it. Splashing, children laughing, a woman's voice sharp and commanding. Derek straightened, his hands still wet from the water line. The fence was solid vinyl, 6 feet tall, the kind that cost $8,000 to install when they'd first moved in 5 years ago. It blocked the view of the common area, the HOA-controlled land that technically belonged to everyone in the Crescent Ridge development, though Derek paid for it through his monthly fees just like every other homeowner. The splashing got louder, more deliberate. He could picture it. The community pool was being renovated, had been for 3 months. The HOA president, Karen Williston, had sent out emails about it. The replacement pool, a temporary inflatable one, had been installed in the common area on the other side of the fence, directly behind Derek's property. He wasn't supposed to care. It wasn't supposed to matter. He'd bought his house specifically because of that fence. Privacy. That was the whole point of the premium lot, the one he'd overpaid for by 40 grand. Derek went back to the sprinkler system, but the sound kept nagging at him. The splashing, the laughter, something about it felt wrong, too close, too regular. By noon, he was on the phone with Sophie. "Hey, bud, can you do me a favor?" "I'm studying, Dad." "1 second, go upstairs to my bedroom, look out the back window, tell me what you see." He heard the sigh, the shuffle of her getting up. A moment later, the fence. Beyond the fence, by the pool. Another pause. He could almost hear her standing on his bed, the old frame creaking. People, are they supposed to be there?" "Which people?" "There's like 3 kids in the pool, and a woman. Is that not allowed or something?" Derek felt it then, a small spark of irritation. "Stay there for 1 second." He walked to the fence, pressed his ear against it. The vinyl was warm from the sun. He could hear them clearly now, splashing, a woman's voice saying, "Madison, your brother's about to dive. Watch the shallow end." He knew that voice. He'd heard it at exactly 4 HOA meetings in the past year. Karen Williston, the president, the woman who'd sent out 3 angry letters about Derek's grass being half an inch too tall. The woman who'd personally inspected his mailbox because it had faded to a shade of taupe that didn't match the community aesthetic guidelines. And she was using his fence, his privacy, his premium lot as a windbreak for her family's free pool time. Derek texted Sophie, "Don't worry about it, finish homework." But he was worried. Not yet, not the kind of worry that keeps you up at night, but the seed of it. The small, irritating awareness that someone was taking something from him, and the system that was supposed to protect his rights was run by the very person doing the taking. That afternoon, he drove to the Crescent Ridge Community Center, where the HOA office was located. A small, cookie-cutter building painted in the community's signature taupe and cream. He'd been inside exactly twice since moving in. Karen was at the front desk. Of course she was. She was always at the front desk, arranging something, fixing something, making sure everyone knew she was important. She looked up when he entered. Karen was in her mid-50s, the kind of woman who'd clearly been told she had a sharp bone structure, one too many times and now weaponized it at every opportunity. Her hair was dyed too blonde for her age, pulled back in a ponytail that seemed to pull her whole face tight. "Derek," she smiled, but it was the smile of someone who'd recently been annoyed by you. "What brings you in?" "I wanted to check the community pool schedule," he said, "just to see when it's open." "Oh, it's under renovation for another month, but we've got the temporary pool set up in the common area. Have you been to see it? It's really quite nice. We're offering free access to all residents, naturally." "Naturally," Derek repeated, "and that access includes the area directly behind my property." Karen's smile tightened just slightly. "Well, the common area is the common area. Your fence doesn't change that fact. The pool is in the common area. Why? Is there an issue?" "There might be," Derek said carefully. "I purchased the premium lot specifically for privacy. Part of that was understanding that the common area, while accessible to everyone, would maintain reasonable boundaries. I don't think having a pool directly against my fence line seems." "The pool isn't against your fence," Karen interrupted. "There's at least 30 feet of clearance. The guidelines don't restrict that. Are you saying you want to prevent residents from using the common area? I'm saying I want to enjoy my property without families in the common area, essentially using my backyard as their private pool setting. Karen leaned back in her chair. Derek, I understand privacy is important, but this is a community. We're all in this together. The temporary pool is available to everyone while the permanent one is being refurbished. I'm not going to tell families they can't use it because one resident objects. The way she said one resident made it clear he was being difficult. He was the problem. Derek left the office 10 minutes later, having accomplished nothing except confirming his suspicion that Karen Williston would not be reasonable about this, that going through official channels would be a waste of time, and that he was going to have to handle this himself. He didn't know yet what this meant, but the seed had grown a little deeper. Over the next week, Derek watched them, not in a creepy way, or that's what he told himself, but in a systematic way. He noted the times they came. Every afternoon between 2 and 5 p.m., Karen would arrive with her youngest, Madison, age 7, according to the HOA directory, and sometimes with her husband, Rick, and sometimes with one or both of her teenagers. They'd set up in the common area right on the other side of his fence, and they'd stay for an hour or two. Derek found himself timing his yard work around their schedule. He'd be outside with his leaf blower or his hedge trimmer, making sure they knew someone was there, that this wasn't some forgotten corner of the development where they could just pretend they were at their own private resort. But they didn't stop coming. If anything, they came more often. On the 8th day, Sophie confronted him about it. Dad, why are you outside literally every single day? And why do you always stand by the fence? They were in the kitchen. Sophie was 16 with her mother's dark eyes and Derek's stubbornness. She'd always been able to see through him. I'm maintaining the property, he said. You're being weird, Sophie replied. You're standing there listening to people enjoy a pool. That's weird. It's not about enjoying a pool. It's about respecting boundaries. That woman. Mrs. Williston. Yes, she's using our privacy as a backdrop for her family time. And she doesn't care because she has power in this community, and she knows I can't do anything about it. Sophie set down her phone. And hear me out, you could just let people enjoy something. It's a pool. It's not like she's storing garbage on your property. You literally can't see them. The principle is you're being petty, Sophie said, not unkindly, but with the absolute certainty of a teenager. And honestly, a little creepy. The standing and listening thing, please stop. She left the kitchen, leaving Derek standing there with his coffee, feeling both defensive and vaguely ashamed, neither of which made him stop. By day 12, Derek was taking screenshots of his Ring camera footage. He had 3 cameras, one pointed at the fence, one at the front of the house, one at the side gate. He'd installed them 2 years ago for security, but now he was documenting every instance of the Williston family using the common area. He didn't know what he was planning to do with the footage. He just knew he needed to build a case. That's when Maria found him in his office, reviewing video at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night. What are you doing? She asked from the doorway. Building a documentation of unauthorized use of the area adjacent to our property, he said, which sounded better than I'm obsessing over our neighbor's pool habits. Maria came around and looked at the screen. A timestamp from that afternoon, 3:47 p.m. Karen and Madison, followed by Rick and their oldest entering the common area, setting up chairs, Madison in a pink float. Oh, Derek, Maria said quietly. What? Whatever this isn't healthy. It's not healthy to let people walk all over you, to let someone in a position of power abuse that power and just accept it. One family using a community pool is not abuse of power. Maria stopped, searching for the words. You're losing perspective. My perspective is fine. My perspective is that I pay for that common area. I have a right to not have it used as someone's private backyard extension. Maria sat down. She looked tired. She looked like someone who'd been watching her husband slowly disappear into something smaller and meaner than the man she'd married. I remember why you wanted this house, she said. You wanted to give Sophie a good neighborhood. You wanted us to have a nice backyard to relax in. You wanted to feel secure. But this isn't security, Derek. This is you choosing to feel angry instead of just living your life. It's not that simple. It really is, Maria said. Or it could be, you could just decide it doesn't matter. You could decide that some woman taking her kids to a community pool isn't a violation of anything sacred. But you won't decide that, so I'm going to ask you, what does winning look like here? What outcome would make you stop? Derek didn't have an answer. That was the problem. There was no winning condition. There was just the constant, gnawing frustration of being on the wrong side of power. The turning point came on day 17. Derek was watering his back lawn, a perfectly normal activity that had nothing to do with the fence and everything to do with the fence, when he heard Corinne's voice on the other side, raised and annoyed. "Madison, stop pulling at the fence. That's not our property, honey." Derek heard a child whining, but Daddy said, "I don't care what Daddy said, leave it alone." Curiosity pulled Derek toward the fence. He found a section where Madison had managed to loosen a small section of vinyl at the bottom, where it met the concrete footer. She'd been trying to make a gap, probably trying to retrieve a ball or something that had rolled under. He crouched down. The vinyl was cracked, not severely, but definitely damaged. And there was something else, a rust stain on the concrete right at the footer, orange, the color of old iron. Derek ran his fingers over it. Definitely rust, but from what? He looked up and down the fence line. There were other stains too, he realized, faint but visible if you knew what you were looking for. The pattern was strange, almost linear, running parallel to the fence. He spent the next hour examining the footer more carefully. Maria was inside, watching him from the kitchen window, and he didn't care anymore if she thought he was obsessive. His obsession had just become useful. There was definitely something under there, something metal, a pipe maybe, or... His hands came away with rust, old, oxidized rust, and something else. Small, granular, he rubbed it between his fingers, sand, possibly very old sand, the kind you'd find if you dug deep enough. The seed had just turned into a tree. That night, Derek went to the Crescent Ridge Property Records office. Everything related to the HOA was technically public record. He'd learned this 6 months ago when he was fighting with Corinne over the mailbox color. The land had been developed in 1987, built out by a company called Southwestern Developments, LLC. Before that, the records got murkier. It had been farmland, maybe, or desert, just like it was before any of it was here. He requested everything available about the property history. The records office closed at 5, but he'd learned that Patricia, who worked the desk, was sympathetic to his perfectionism. She said she'd make copies and have them ready tomorrow morning. That next morning, Derek was at the office when it opened. Patricia handed him a folder, and he drove directly to work late so he could spend an hour at a coffee shop going through it. The land had been purchased in 1982 by Southwestern Developments from a family named Hernandez, who'd owned it since 1967. Before that, it went back through various owners, stretching back to the 1920s. The oldest records were sparse, just names and dates, but there were abstracts, property descriptions that varied over the decades. One description, from 1941, caught his attention. Excluding any rights to the natural water feature located at the northern property line, which shall remain the property of the previous landholders and any successors thereof. Natural water feature. Derek's hands started shaking a little. He drove directly to the library and pulled up old topographic maps of the area on the computer. The library had a surprising collection of them in digital form. 1950s maps, 1970s maps, 1990s maps. On the 1950s map, right at the location that would eventually become Crescent Ridge, there was a mark. A small blue mark that indicated water. Not large, just a point, but it was definitely there. By the 1970s, that mark was gone. The land had been developed, the water feature presumably dried up or obscured. Derek drove home in a daze, his mind spinning through possibilities. If there had been a water feature, a spring, maybe, or a well, and if it was still there under the common area right behind his fence. What did that mean? What would it mean for Corinne to be using that area? For the HOA to have built a pool directly over something that legally might not belong to them? He didn't have answers, but he knew someone who might. Robert Martinez was a surveyor Derek found through the county records. He'd reviewed several property surveys in the area, and his name appeared on a number of documents related to Crescent Ridge. Derek called him that afternoon. "I'm wondering if you'd be available to do a survey," Derek said. "Specifically, I'm interested in any underground structures or natural features on the HOA common area property." That's unusual, Robert said. Most people want surveys for boundaries or property lines. It's a hobby thing, Derek lied smoothly. I'm interested in the history of the land. My property backs up to the common area, and I've found some old records suggesting there might be something there. An old well, maybe, or a spring. Robert was quiet for a moment. I can do a survey, but I'll need authorization from the HOA. Common area is their land, technically. I can't just go poking around without permission. Of course, because even trying to find out what was on his own land required asking permission from Karen Williston. What if I just wanted you to look at records? Derek asked. Survey records, property records, anything on file about the common area. That's public record. I can do that. It'll take a few days to pull everything and review it. Do it, Derek said. He hung up, feeling something crystallize inside him. He didn't have a plan yet, but he was going to have answers. And once he had answers, everything would be different. End of part 1, The Beat. Derek hangs up the phone, looking out his back window at the fence. Behind it, the common area. Behind that, the pool where he can hear the faint sounds of children playing. But now he knows there's something else back there, something buried, something old, and something that might matter a lot more than anyone realizes. The camera pulls back, pulling back, showing Derek in his office, the fence, the pool, the desert horizon beyond. Something is about to change. Everything is about to change. Part 2, The Discovery. 3 days later, Robert Martinez sent Derek an email with a PDF attached. Derek opened it at work in his office and had to stand up and close the door. The file was titled, Crescent Ridge Common Area Historical Survey Analysis. According to the records Robert had compiled, there had indeed been a well on the property, an old one, drilled in 1923 by a man named Alejandro Hernandez, who'd owned the land at the time. The well had been noted in property records through the 1960s, when it was classified as inactive and non-functional. But the location of the well was documented. Coordinates were included. And those coordinates placed it directly in the common area, approximately 40 feet from Derek's property line, right in the zone where the temporary pool had been installed. But there was more. Robert had done additional research. He'd contacted the Arizona Department of Water Resources and pulled historical well records. The well had been deep, over 200 feet. It had been drilled into an aquifer that fed a natural spring that had once flowed on the property. That spring was what the 1941 property description had been referring to when it mentioned a natural water feature. According to Arizona water law, natural water features, springs and their feeders, could have specific legal protections. If the spring and well on Crescent Ridge property were considered a natural water source, they might be classified differently than typical groundwater. They might belong to the land itself, not to the HOA development. More importantly, there was an easement. The easement had been established in 1982 when Southwestern Developments purchased the land from the Hernandez family. It was a water rights easement in perpetuity, specifically referring to the well and any natural water features associated with it. According to the easement, the previous landowners, the Hernandez family and their descendants, had retained rights to access the water feature for personal use, despite selling the land. Derek read this part 5 times. The easement was still active. It had been transferred through property records, updated as the Hernandez land changed hands. And according to the documentation Robert had found, it had never been formally dissolved or released. Which meant, technically, someone somewhere might still have legal rights to that water. And the HOA, by building a pool over it without acknowledging the easement, might have committed a violation of a decades-old agreement. Derek picked up the phone and called Robert back immediately. This easement, Derek said, how binding is it? If it was never formally released or dissolved, and if it was properly recorded, it would be binding, Robert said. But I'm not a lawyer, I'm just a surveyor. You'd need actual legal counsel to know what it means in practice. Do you know how to find someone's descendants, the Hernandez family? That's not really my field, but have you tried the internet, social media? Derek thanked him, hung up, and spent the next 4 hours on Ancestry.com, Facebook, and various people search websites. The Hernandez family had spread out over the decades. Alejandro Hernandez's direct line had produced 5 children, 3 of whom had children of their own, who had children, and so on. By the 1990s, the family had scattered across Arizona, California, and Nevada. Most of them didn't even know they had an easement on an old property in Phoenix, because the easement had become essentially meaningless once the land was developed and the well became inaccessible. But Derek found them anyway. He found a LinkedIn profile for a woman named Maria Hernandez who lived in Scottsdale and worked as a paralegal. He found a Facebook account for a Daniel Hernandez in Tempe. He found a phone number for a Rosa Hernandez in Casa Grande who was in her 70s and listed her maiden name as Hernandez, suggesting she'd married into it and might still have family connection. He started calling. Most of them hung up or said wrong number. But Rosa Hernandez in Casa Grande listened to his entire explanation of the easement and the well and the HOA pool. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "My husband's grandfather bought that land," she said finally. "Back in the 20s. My husband used to talk about the well. He said it was one of the clearest, cleanest wells in the region. He'd visited it once when he was young before it dried up." "It didn't dry up," Derek said carefully. "It's still there, under an HOA development." "You're sure?" "I have survey records, property records, an easement that shows your family never completely released rights to it." Another long silence. "That easement," Rosa said slowly. "My husband mentioned something about that. He said his family had tried to release it back in the 70s, but there was a problem with the paperwork, some issue with the title company. After a while, they just gave up. They thought it didn't matter anymore. No one was going to use a dried-up old well in the middle of Phoenix." Derek's pulse quickened. But if the paperwork was incomplete, the easement might still be valid. "I suppose it might," Rosa said, "though I don't understand why that would matter now." "Because," Derek said slowly, "I think the HOA president is using that land without respecting what's actually there, without knowing what's under it, and I think you might have a claim on it." He didn't tell her about Karen, about the pool or the family swimming. He kept it technical, legal, abstract, but something in Rosa's voice shifted, a spark of interest, a sense that maybe, after 50 years, something that her family had let go was worth picking back up. She asked for his number and said she'd look into it. She said she'd talk to her lawyer. Derek hung up and felt something like triumph. He'd found the thread. He'd pulled on it. Now he was going to see what unraveled. What he didn't expect was for Karen Williston to call him 48 hours later. "Derek, I heard something about you contacting a surveyor about the common area," she said without preamble. "Is that true?" His stomach dropped. How had she found out? Robert was a professional. He wouldn't have told her. Unless... "I had some historical questions," Derek said carefully. "About what?" "Just about the property history." "Because," Karen continued, and he could hear the tension in her voice, "the common area is HOA property, and any surveys or investigations need to go through the board. You can't just hire contractors to poke around on our land without authorization." "I'm not poking around on your land. I'm researching my property's history." "Which involves our property, which means you need approval, board approval. And honestly, Derek, after the way you've been acting, lurking by the fence, being weird about us using the pool, I'm starting to think your motivations are about harassment rather than legitimate research." His anger flared fast and hot. "I'm not harassing anyone. I'm investigating something that concerns my property rights." "What could possibly concern your property rights about the common area?" He almost told her. The words were right there, ready to spill out. But something stopped him. Some instinct to keep the knowledge to himself, to not warn her, to let her keep swimming over a potential legal minefield without knowing it was there. "Nothing that I need to discuss with you," he said. "If the board has issues with my research methods, they can contact me." "Consider yourself contacted," Karen snapped. "And Derek, this vendetta you have about the pool, about us using the common area, it's going to stop. We're all allowed to use the community amenities. Just because you have some weird privacy hang-up doesn't change that." "It's not a privacy hang-up. It's respect for boundaries." "Your boundaries end at your fence," Karen said. "Goodbye, Derek." She hung up. Derek sat for a moment, the phone still in his hand, running through the conversation. How had she known about the surveyor? Who had told her? Then he realized it didn't matter. She was worried now. She was calling him, confronting him, trying to shut him down. That meant she sensed something. She didn't know what, but she knew something wasn't right. That night, he called Robert Martinez back. "I need you to physically survey the common area," he said. I need to know exactly where that well is, and I need detailed documentation. I explained, Derek. I need HOA authorization. So get it. I'd need to ask them directly. Then do that, Derek said. Tell them you need to conduct a routine survey of common area infrastructure. Don't mention the well. Just say you're documenting subsurface features for property records. There was a pause. That feels dishonest. It's not dishonest, it's just selective information. Everything you're telling them is true, you're just not telling them why. Robert was quiet. I'll think about it, he finally said. Derek didn't push. He'd given him an out, which meant Robert might actually do it. What Derek didn't know was that Karen had already moved to the board. An emergency meeting was called, not with the general membership, but with the 5-person board of directors. Karen sat at the head of the table in the community center office, flanked by Rick, her husband, who served as treasurer, and 3 other residents. James and Diane, a retired couple, and young Marcus, who worked in tech and had been recruited to modernize the HOA's digital systems. Derek Chen is conducting unauthorized investigations on common area property, Karen said, presenting it as settled fact. He's hired a surveyor to poke around, and I think it's harassment. I think he's trying to find some way to limit our community's use of that area. What's his motivation? Diane asked. She was generally fair-minded, which made her Karen's biggest obstacle. Privacy, mostly. He doesn't like that we've been using the pool. It's behind his property, and apparently that bothers him. That seems like his problem, Marcus said, not ours. That's what I thought, Karen said. But now he's getting a surveyor involved, asking about property history and underground features. I'm wondering if he's trying to manufacture some kind of code violation or legal issue to shut down the pool. What underground features? James asked. Like what? He wouldn't say. But I'm concerned he's going to try to claim there's something wrong with the common area that prevents us from using it as designed. Diane leaned back in her chair. We should just ask him what he's doing, invite him to the next general meeting and let him explain himself. Karen's jaw tightened. I don't think he's going to be honest about his motivations. Then we demand honesty as a condition of access to common area records, Diane said. If Derek wants to research common area property, the board has a right to know why and what he's found. He hasn't found anything, Karen said quickly. That's the point. He's fishing. He's trying to find something. Or, Diane said carefully, he's genuinely researching something and hasn't found what he's looking for yet. Either way, hostile action against him isn't going to make the problem go away. Better to meet it head-on. Karen looked at her husband. Rick, understanding the look, said, I agree with Diane. We should find out what he wants, make it official, make it controlled. In the end, that's what they decided. They would invite Derek to the next board meeting. Not a general meeting, just the board, and ask him directly what he was investigating and why. Karen left the meeting frustrated but calculating. If they controlled the conversation, they controlled the narrative. And there was no way Derek had actually found anything damaging. It was just an old property. There was nothing there. She was completely, entirely wrong. Derek got the official letter 2 days later. Board meeting at 7 p.m. on Thursday. They wanted to discuss his recent requests for surveying and research on common area property. His attendance was requested. He should have been nervous. Instead, he felt something like calm. This was it. This was the moment where everything came into the light. He spent that evening preparing. He printed out Robert's survey analysis. He printed out the easement documentation. He printed out the water rights records from Arizona DWR. He organized everything into a presentation, chronological and clear. At 6:45 p.m., he was in his office, making final notes on his laptop when Maria knocked. You're really doing this? She said, not a question. They called a board meeting about me. I'm going to explain what I found. And what did you find? That they might be violating a 70-year-old easement. That there's a water rights issue on that property that they never disclosed. That Karen Williston might be breaking the law by building a pool over protected groundwater without authorization from the original easement holders. Maria sat down. And then what? You expose her, she faces consequences. What changes for us? Everything changes, Derek said. Justice gets served. The system works. The person who's been using their power to push people around finally faces pushback. Or, Maria said slowly, You poke a hornet's nest and everyone gets stung. You expose Karen, maybe she faces a fine or something. Meanwhile, the neighborhood erupts into drama. We're the people who tried to shut down the community pool. We're the people who dug up old legal technicalities to win a petty grudge. That's not justice, Derek. That's revenge dressed up as something nobler. It's not revenge, it's facts. It's you being angry about feeling powerless and finally finding a way to have power and using it to hurt someone. That's what I see. That's what I'm afraid of. Derek stood up. I should go, they're waiting. Maria didn't stop him as he left. The boardroom was smaller than Derek expected. A table, 5 chairs on one side, 1 chair on the other, where he was clearly meant to sit. Under a spotlight, figuratively speaking. Karen, Rick, Diane, James, and Marcus all looked up as he entered. Derek, Diane said, gesturing to the empty chair. Thanks for coming. We wanted to discuss your recent property research activities. Derek sat, placing his folder of documents on the table. I appreciate you asking directly. It shows responsibility. So, Karen said impatiently, what are you looking for? Derek opened the folder and spread out the first document, the historical well records. Your common area property has an old well on it. It was drilled in 1923 and is still accessible, according to survey records. More importantly, that well was part of an easement agreement established in 1982. He placed down the easement documentation. The easement was never formally released by the original landowners or their heirs. According to Arizona water law, that easement may still be valid, which means the property that currently hosts your community pool may have standing water rights that don't belong to the HOA. The room was silent. Karen's face had gone carefully blank. How confident are you in this? Diane asked. Robert Martinez, the surveyor, is confident in the historical records and the easement. I've verified everything through county property records and Arizona DWR. The legality, what this actually means in practice, I'm not qualified to say. That would require an actual attorney specializing in water rights. Marcus looked at Karen. Did we do an environmental survey when the pool was installed? Karen's voice, when she spoke, was flat. I don't recall one being required for a temporary installation. That might have been an oversight, Diane said. If there's an easement issue, even if it's old and probably dormant, we should have checked. It is definitely dormant, Rick said quickly. No one's used this easement in decades. The well's been inactive for probably 50 years. That doesn't matter, Derek said quietly. The question isn't whether anyone's using it. The question is whether the easement is still valid. If it is, then the HOA potentially violated the rights of the original easement holders by developing over it without their consent. And you've contacted the easement holders? Diane asked. Derek hesitated. He could lie. He could say he was still researching. But the truth was already there, waiting to be told, and lying wouldn't change anything except make him complicit in the cover-up. I found one of the Hernandez family descendants. Rosa Hernandez, she's in Casa Grande. I explained the situation. Karen stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You did what? I explained the situation, Derek repeated, meeting her eyes. Because she has a legal right to know about an easement that might still give her family rights to that property. You decided to contact someone and tell them to come after our property. That's not your place. It's exactly my place, Derek said. Because my property backs up to this. Because my rights to my property might be affected. And because the right thing to do is inform people of information that legally belongs to them. The right thing, Karen repeated, her voice dripping with contempt. You did this because you're angry about the pool. You did this to hurt me. I did it because you broke the law, or maybe you broke the law. I'm not sure anymore. But you definitely didn't do your due diligence before building that pool. Diane cleared her throat. I think what we need to do is hire an attorney to review this. Derek, are you going to pursue legal action? That's not my decision to make, Derek said. Rosa Hernandez is, but I'm going to provide her with everything I've found. She'll decide what to do with it. Karen was staring at him with a look of pure hatred. It was a look that said she'd underestimated him, and she'd never do that again. This board meeting is over, Diane said. We'll consult with an HOA attorney about the easement issue. We'll figure out what to do about the pool. Derek, we'll be in touch. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. It was a dismissal. Derek gathered his documents and stood, but before he left, he looked directly at Karen. "I'm going to send copies of everything I've found to Rosa Hernandez," he said. "She'll be contacting the HOA, probably through an attorney. I'd suggest you start preparing for that conversation now rather than later." He walked out of the boardroom, down the hallway, and out into the Phoenix night. The temperature had dropped to maybe 80, and the air felt clean and clear after the recycled air of the office. His phone buzzed as he was walking to his car. A text from Maria, "How did it go?" He didn't respond. He just sat in his car for a moment in the dark, wondering if he'd done something great or something terrible, and realizing he couldn't tell the difference anymore. Derek sits in his dark car, the HOA office glowing softly behind him. His phone glows in his hand, a message from his wife. He doesn't answer. Instead, he starts the car and pulls out of the parking lot. Behind him, through the office windows, we see Karen and Rick standing still, arguing silently. The camera pulls back, pulling back. Derek's car driving through the quiet suburban streets. A man carrying a bomb he's just built and released, not knowing where it's going to land, not knowing if he's the hero or the villain anymore. The well beneath the common area, hidden and dormant, waiting in the dark to change everything. Rosa Hernandez hired an attorney on Monday morning. His name was David Torres, and he specialized in water rights and property law. Derek didn't know this until Rosa called him to ask for all his documentation, which he provided without hesitation or condition. On Wednesday, Rosa called back. "Mr. Torres says the easement is real and probably still valid," she said. "He says the HOA may have committed what he calls tortious interference with a protected property right. He's writing a letter to them." "What does that mean exactly?" Derek asked. "It means they interfered with our right to use the water feature. Even if we weren't actively using it, even if we didn't know about it, they can't just build over it without permission. He says we might have grounds for a lawsuit." Derek felt something settle in his chest, not satisfaction exactly, but finality. The wheels were turning now and no one was going to stop them. What he didn't anticipate was how fast they'd turn. Tor's letter arrived at the HOA office on Thursday morning, and Karen received a copy because she was the HOA president. The letter was professional but pointed. It outlined the easement, the water rights, the potential violation, and requested that the HOA immediately cease use of the common area pool pending legal review of the property rights issue. It also requested that the HOA provide all documentation related to the pool installation and the environmental review, or lack thereof, that preceded it. Karen scheduled an emergency board meeting for that evening. By then, word was starting to spread through the neighborhood. Someone at the HOA office had mentioned the legal letter to someone else, who mentioned it to a third person, and by the time evening came around, the community center was packed not just with the board, but with residents who'd come to find out what the hell was happening with the pool. Derek hadn't planned to attend. He'd done what he came to do, but Maria insisted. "You started this," she said. "You should be here to see where it ends or to explain yourself to our neighbors." The meeting room was set up with a projector and a large screen. Karen stood at the front, flanked by their HOA attorney, a man named Gerald Hutchins, and Rick. The residents filed in, taking seats, murmuring to each other. Derek and Maria sat in the back. "Thank you all for coming," Karen said, her voice tight with forced composure. "We have an unexpected legal issue that needs to be addressed. I'm going to let Gerald explain." Gerald Hutchins was in his 60s, with the careful polish of someone who'd spent his career protecting property owners' rights. He explained the situation in clear, measured terms. There was an historical easement, there was a possible water rights issue, and until it could be resolved, the HOA was going to take the pool offline as a precaution. "How long?" someone shouted from the crowd. "Until legal review is complete," Gerald said. "We're estimating 2 to 4 weeks." Uproar, residents started calling out. Their kids wanted to use the pool, the permanent pool wasn't done yet, this was ridiculous, someone's fault here. Karen held up her hands for calm, but the damage was done. The narrative was already forming. Someone had sabotaged the community amenity by dredging up old legal technicalities. "Who found this easement?" someone else shouted. Derek felt every eye in the room turn, searching. Maria grabbed his hand, a warning, a plea, but it was too late. Derek stood up. "I did," he said. He raised his voice enough to be heard over the murmuring. I researched the property history and found documentation of an active easement that the HOA may have overlooked before installing the pool. Why were you researching the property? This from a woman he didn't recognize. Because I was angry about your kids using my fence as a backdrop, Derek thought. Because I wanted to win. Because I wanted power over someone else for once. Because I wanted to know the full legal status of the property that backs up to my lot, he said, which was technically true if you were generous with interpretation. So this is about you, Karen said, her voice cutting through the room. You did this because I made you mad about the mailbox, about the grass. This is a vendetta. This is about property rights, Derek said, about legal obligations. This is about you being petty, Karen said, standing now, facing him across the room. About you not getting your way, so you decided to hurt the whole community. Congratulations, Derek, you stopped kids from swimming. You feel powerful yet. The room was completely silent now, everyone watching the confrontation, the story crystallizing in real time. I feel like I did the right thing, Derek said quietly. You feel like you won, Karen corrected, and winning was more important to you than being part of this community. Before Derek could respond, an older man stood up. James, one of the board members, he didn't raise his voice, but he had presence. I think Derek did exactly what any responsible resident should have done, James said. He found an issue and reported it. The blame here doesn't rest with him. It rests with the HOA for not doing proper due diligence before developing the common area. We should have had an environmental survey. We should have reviewed the full property history. The fact that we didn't is on us. A few people nodded, but more looked angry. The room was divided now, some understanding Derek's position, others seeing him as the person who'd ruined their summer. Derek sat back down. Maria squeezed his hand, but she didn't look at him. Going forward, Gerald said, trying to regain control of the meeting, we're going to work with the Hernandez family representatives to resolve this issue. We're exploring options, including potentially installing a different community amenity in a different location. This doesn't have to be a disaster. It's just an inconvenience that we need to work through. An inconvenience, Karen repeated bitterly. She was still looking at Derek. That's one word for it. The meeting lasted another hour, but Derek stopped listening after the first 20 minutes. He just sat with Maria, feeling the weight of collective disappointment and anger settling on his shoulders. Around them, neighbors he'd never properly met were muttering about him, about lawyers, about what this meant for their community fees and their property values if the HOA got tied up in litigation. One man, as he filed out, made eye contact with Derek and said, very quietly, "You should move." Derek didn't argue. He just sat there feeling the truth of it. The lawsuit was filed 2 weeks later. Hernandez v. Crescent Ridge HOA, and named as co-defendant was Karen Williston, personally, for negligent failure to conduct due diligence. The suit claimed tortious interference with the water rights easement and demanded that the HOA either remove the pool or pay damages to the Hernandez family in the amount of $250,000. The local news picked it up. Historic water rights dispute SURFACES in Phoenix neighborhood, read the headline. They interviewed Derek, though he requested not to be named. They interviewed Karen, who was more than happy to be named and who presented herself as a victim of a technical legal maneuver designed to destroy community harmony. I think when you look at the facts, Karen said to the camera, standing in front of the pool with her arms crossed, you'll see that this is about one resident's personal grievance being weaponized into a legal attack on our entire community. That's what I see. Derek saw it the way it was. An HOA president who'd been caught breaking rules and was now trying to spin her way out of consequences. But he understood that there were multiple true narratives, and the one that won in the court of public opinion wasn't necessarily the one backed by documents and records. His phone started ringing, other residents, some supportive, many not. Why didn't you just talk to us? Why did you have to go legal? Are you aware you're making our HOA dues go up? My kids are crying about the pool, you happy? Sophie wouldn't speak to him for 3 days. When she finally did, it was to say, everyone at school knows I'm the girl whose dad shut down the pool. It's awesome. Thanks for that. Maria stopped asking him how his day was. She just existed in the house around him, cordial and distant, like a guest in her own home. Derek had won. He'd exposed Karen, triggered an investigation, empowered the Hernandez family to claim their rights. By every objective measure, justice had been served. But as he sat alone in his house, refreshing news articles about the lawsuit, refreshing his email to see if any other residents had written to support him, he felt something he hadn't anticipated. He felt alone. He felt like the person everyone blamed. And then something happened that Derek never saw coming. The well turned out to be real. Not just legally real, physically real, still present, still there under the common area. When the survey equipment and ground-penetrating radar finally located it, Robert Martinez had finally conducted the official survey, with HOA approval this time. They found an old iron casing, heavily oxidized, about 40 feet from Derek's fence line. But that wasn't the biggest discovery. When they started digging to properly document the well, they found something else. Something much, much older. They found pottery. Native American pottery, fragments and pieces, scattered in a pattern that suggested not random debris but deliberate placement. And under the pottery, they found stone, carefully arranged stones in what might have been the remains of a structure or a ceremonial space, or something that had been there long before Alejandro Hernandez drilled his well in 1923. The state archaeologist was called in. The digging was halted pending investigation. And suddenly, the story wasn't about property rights and HOA management anymore. It was about archaeological significance. It was about whether this land had been a historically important site for the Native American tribes that had lived in Arizona long before any of them were here. Derek found out about it from a news alert on his phone. The headline read, "Potential Ancient Site Discovered in Phoenix Suburb During Well Investigation." He sat down hard on the kitchen counter, reading the article. They were bringing in specialists from Arizona State University. They were going to conduct a full archaeological survey. The common area was now an active dig site, pending tribal consultation and proper protocols. The pool wasn't coming back, not for a long time, not in the same place. Possibly not ever, because if the site was significant, it would be protected. Derek had thought he was exposing a simple HOA violation. Instead, he'd accidentally uncovered something that changed everything about what the land actually was and meant and represented. His phone rang. It was Rosa Hernandez. "Did you know?" she asked without preamble. "Know what?" "About the artifacts, the archaeological site." "No, I just found out like you did." "So you didn't know there were artifacts when you contacted me?" Derek realized what she was asking. "No, I didn't even know about the well definitively until I hired the surveyor." Rosa was quiet for a moment. "My husband's grandfather used to talk about visiting the well," she said slowly. "He said there were old things there, old pieces. He thought they were just rocks, but Derek, I think my family knew. I think my ancestors knew that there was something important at that place. I think that's why they protected it. The easement. Maybe they weren't trying to protect water rights at all. Maybe they were trying to protect the land itself." Derek hadn't considered that. The possibility that the original intent of the easement had been something else entirely, something deeper. A family trying to preserve something sacred, using the only legal mechanism available to them in a time when indigenous rights weren't protected. "If that's true," Derek said slowly, "then maybe this is actually the right outcome. Maybe the land gets protected because of what it is, not because of a legal technicality." "Or maybe," Rosa said, "we're just lucky that your anger ended up pointing toward the truth, even though that wasn't why you started digging, even though your motivation was just to win." Derek, standing in his backyard, looking at his fence. Behind him, his house where his family exists in polite isolation. Beyond the fence, the common area, no longer a simple pool but now a professional dig site with archaeologists and equipment and carefully marked sections. He didn't mean to uncover this. He meant to win a small battle. Instead, he uncovered something that makes his battle seem ridiculous in comparison. The camera pulls back, showing the whole development, the suburban sprawl, the carefully manicured lawns, the fence lines, and then pulling past it to show what was underneath it all along. A moment where his personal vendetta collided with something larger, something that mattered in ways he never anticipated. The story isn't over, but the meaning of it has just shifted entirely. 3 weeks into the excavation, Derek attended his first community meeting since everything exploded. It was held at the community center, and unlike the last board meeting, This one was organized by residents who wanted to understand what was happening and what it meant for their development. The Arizona State University archaeologist, Dr. Patricia Weiss, was there to present findings. Derek slipped into the back of the room, hopping to be invisible. Maria wasn't with him. They'd had a conversation that morning that felt final in a way that conversations shouldn't be final, and now they existed in the same house like ghosts. Dr. Weiss was in her 50s, with gray-streaked hair and an air of academic authority. She set up a laptop and projector and began to explain. The site contains pottery shards consistent with HOA culture, dating back approximately 801,000 years, she said, showing images of fragments. The arrangement and context suggest this was a ritual or ceremonial space, possibly associated with the water feature. The well that was drilled in 1923 actually cut into what we believe was a prehistoric water management system. Channels, likely, that directed water for both practical and spiritual purposes. She showed diagrams, maps, thermal imaging that revealed structures beneath the surface that no one had realized were there. This land, Dr. Weiss continued, was likely a sacred or significant site for the ancestors of the tribes that currently have territorial claims to this region. The Wadam people, specifically, based on preliminary analysis. We've been in contact with them, and they've requested that we pause excavation while they conduct their own assessment of the site's significance. Someone in the crowd raised their hand. So the pool stays gone. The pool, Dr. Weiss said carefully, should not be reinstalled at this location. If this site is determined to be historically significant, which it appears to be, it will likely require protection status and possibly repatriation of artifacts or remains if any are found. So the HOA built a pool over a sacred Native American site? Another person asked. The HOA didn't know, James said from the front row. He was on the board. Derek remembered him from the meetings. That's the issue here. Neither we nor the original developers in 1987 were aware of the archaeological significance. That's not really an excuse, but it's a fact. Someone was aware, Dr. Weiss said quietly. The Hernandez family maintained an easement on this land for decades. That easement may have been specifically to protect this site, even after their direct use of it became impractical or impossible. Derek felt eyes turning toward him. Not everyone in the room, but some. The people who'd put together that the Hernandez connection had come through Derek's research. I think we should acknowledge something here, Dr. Weiss said, and Derek realized she was looking directly at him. The reason we found this site at all is because one resident took the time to research the property history thoroughly. Derek Chen identified the easement issue, which led to the survey, which led to the discovery of the well, which led to the archaeological investigation. Without his diligence, this site would still be unknown and at risk. The room was silent. Derek felt the weight of that statement, not judgment, just fact. However, Dr. Weiss continued, the original motivation doesn't change the significance of what was discovered. This is now a matter of historical preservation and tribal consultation, not just property rights. After the meeting ended, Derek was walking toward the exit when Karen intercepted him. She was alone, which was unusual. She looked smaller than Derek remembered, diminished. I'm suing you, she said without preamble. Derek stopped. What? I'm suing you for defamation, for tortious interference, for intentionally causing financial and reputational harm to me personally. My attorney is drawing up the papers. Karen, you destroyed my reputation, she said, her voice quiet and intense. You made me look like someone who didn't care about community or the law or anything other than a personal vendetta. You turned neighbors into enemies. You made me the villain of this whole thing. You were using the common area without checking the easement, Derek said. I didn't make you do that. I just exposed it. Because you were angry, Karen said. Because I gave you 3 letters about your grass. That's it. That's the only reason. And you've spent months trying to prove I'm corrupt or incompetent or something, and you don't even realize that in doing so, you've revealed that you're the one without integrity. Derek wanted to argue. He wanted to defend his actions, but he looked at her face, genuinely hurt, genuinely angry, and he realized that Karen's version of events wasn't necessarily wrong. It was just incomplete. The truth was more complicated than either of their narratives. I didn't expect the archaeological site, he said quietly. So what? Karen asked. You still did what you did. The motivation matters, Derek. It matters a lot. You can't just say, oh, well, I meant to hurt the HOA, but instead I uncovered something important, so now I'm absolved. That's not how morality works. She walked away before he could respond. The lawsuit never actually materialized. Derek's attorney sent a letter explaining that Karen would have difficulty proving damages or tortious interference, given that Derek's actions had resulted in the discovery of a historically significant site, which was, technically, a positive public outcome. Karen's lawyer apparently advised her that the suit would be expensive and likely unsuccessful. But the damage to Derek's relationship with his community was done. It was permanent. People acknowledged that the archaeological discovery was good, but they also looked at Derek differently now, as someone who'd used anger and legal maneuvering to win a small, personal battle, even if the consequences ended up being positive. It was a strange kind of triumph. He'd been right, but for the wrong reasons. He'd exposed something real, but the original motivation had been petty and personal, and everyone in the community knew it. Maria left him on a Saturday morning in July, 5 months after he'd first heard the Williston kids splashing in the pool. She didn't leave dramatically. She didn't yell or cry or make accusations. She just packed a suitcase, called a car, and said goodbye to Sophie, who was already gone. She'd requested to stay with her boyfriend's family for the summer, and Maria had facilitated it. Derek found a note on the kitchen counter. I love you, but I don't recognize who you've become. I hope you find your way back to being someone I can recognize. Sophie texted him 2 days later. Mom told me about you, about why you really dug into the property thing, about the anger part, not the justice part. Thanks for making summer complicated. The excavation continued through August and into September. Derek watched it from his fence line sometimes, seeing the archaeologists carefully removing soil, cataloging pieces, taking measurements. It was methodical and respectful, everything his own investigation had not been. One afternoon, Dr. Weiss was working near the fence when she spotted Derek watching. You should see the site from the inside, she called over. Would you like a tour? Derek was surprised to be asked. I don't want to intrude. You're kind of already integral to the story, Dr. Weiss said, not unkindly. Come on. She walked him through the excavation zone, explaining what they'd found. The pottery wasn't just random fragments. It was distributed in ways that suggested intentional offerings. The channels beneath the surface were sophisticated, designed to manage water flow in dry conditions. The whole site, taken together, suggested a place of careful engineering and spiritual significance. Your family, the Hernandez family, they knew what was here, Dr. Weiss said. We've been consulting with the Wadam people, and they believe that Hernandez ancestors might have intermarried with local tribes, or at least been community members integrated into the landscape. The easement might have been a way of protecting sacred space, even after they'd sold the land. So Rosa's husband's grandfather, Derek started. Probably knew, Dr. Weiss finished. He probably knew this place was sacred, even if he couldn't articulate why legally. The easement was a way of saying, this place is not mine to sell completely. And it worked. It's protected now. Derek looked at the site. The careful excavation, the preserved structures, the respected handling of something important. I didn't mean to discover this, he said. No, Dr. Weiss agreed. But you did, and now it's going to be preserved. That's good, even if your initial motivation was less altruistic. Everyone in my community hates me. Some of them do, Dr. Weiss said. But I think that'll change. A year from now, people will look at this site and recognize it as culturally important and significant. They'll think about what it means to live on land that has history. And your role in discovering it, even if it came from personal conflict, will eventually seem less like a vendetta and more like a necessary catalyst. That doesn't help me right now, Derek said. No, Dr. Weiss agreed, but time might.